My name is Munyao Kilolo, and I am the founder and editor-in-chief of the Ituĩka Literary Platform, a platform that is devoted to African languages and translation. And this platform was founded in 2021. And one of our first projects that we are doing now, between the 11th and 12th of November, is the Ituĩka Writing and Translation Workshop that has been happening at Enashipai in Naivasha. And we gathered 17 writers writing in various Kenyan languages. And we had the privilege of having Professor Kimani Wajogu and Jen Obuchi as the facilitators, both of whom are extremely accomplished in the work that they've done in African languages. And we are hoping that by the time that these writers leave this place, they are going to be fully equipped not only to write, but also to translate and to engage the entire process of publishing these stories in a way that will bring the best stories possible to be published as a multilingual anthology. Before coming to found this platform, I'd been working for a long time with a collective called Jalada Africa, in which we did a number of language and translation projects. And I introduced, while working as the managing editor of Jalada between 2014 and 2018, I introduced a translation project whose concept was to get one short story translated into as many languages as possible. And the story was originally written in Gikuyu by Professor Gugi Thiong'o, and it was translated into English and then subsequently to all the other 100 languages. Then after working with Jalada, I started to do work with the Gugi Thiong'o Foundation, in which I map what is happening in the African languages, in Africa in terms of literature that is in African languages. But also I work with the Mabati Kono Kiswahili Prize, just to make sure that the day-to-day aspects of the prize go well. The 2021 Ituĩka Writing and Translation Workshop was a project that I had been thinking about for a very long time. And I think the first time I really conceptualized it was in 2019, when Professor Gugi was in the country then to promote some of his books, but to also go around the country speaking about the importance of promoting Kenyan languages and engage in those languages both in academia and in popular publishing. And I spoke to him a lot about this idea of bringing writers from across the country to gather together and have a conversation about what we can do as a collective of writers to ensure that there is a robust approach in terms of publishing and writing in our languages. And especially because there's been very little support in terms of publishing this kind of stories. Most of what is in the market is material targeted to children or lower school materials. But we have the opportunity to be able to develop material that can be read by any audience. And by gathering these writers, we felt that we are going to do something that hasn't been done in a long time, or maybe has never been done, to get Kenyan writers to come together, contribute stories, and publish a multilingual anthology of stories. And this way, we are going to emphasize on the idea of the relationship between the different Kenyan languages, but also the fact that they can work well together and people can read stories in these languages, regardless of in which language they've originally been written in, and that is through translation. So in my thinking about this workshop, I needed it to have the original Kenyan language, but also a translation into Kiswahili and a translation into English. in which case now people will not say that they're not able to read those stories because they can read either in either of the two national languages, but also international audiences will be able to access stories originally written in Kenyan languages through the English translation or the Kiswahili translation. By gathering these writers together in one space, we wanted them to be able to have not only a conversation about language and translation and their own writing processes, but we want to create a publication, a multilingual publication of stories in different Kenyan languages, in which case people across the country can have a publication that has different languages in it as a way of showing that the different languages can have a conversation, can coexist. But there's no fear really about having material that you cannot read, because part of the core thing about this workshop is to enable translations, and through translation into both languages, both national languages, which is Kiswahili and English, it will be possible for anyone across the country to be able to read those stories. We'll not have to worry about which language they originated in, right? They will have access because there's an English translation, and maybe possibly later on, people can translate into as many other languages as possible. When we made this call in the middle of the year, we only gave 1 month for people to send in stories. And because, of course, at that time we had not developed the platform and the website, it was still in the process of developing. We made social media calls with a blog, right, to just spread the information. And the uptake was really good. And our request was very detailed. We wanted the people who were sending stories and interested in participating in this workshop to first of all send a story originally in a Kenyan language, or if not originally written in a Kenyan language, a translation of an existing Kenyan story into one of the Kenyan languages. Okay, so we sent out this information and requested for applications, and we put a deadline of only 30 days. And when we received the submissions, they were well over 40 different languages, but we could only select so many. So we ended up selecting 17 participants, writing in various Kenyan languages, and they've all finally gathered here. And the selection process, of course, was quite complicated because you're looking, we had a selection team of 4 people, right? And the 4 people were looking at stories in so many other different languages that they themselves do not speak, right? So we had a team of myself, Mokoma Wagugi, Kimani Wajogu, and Jen Obuchi, and we all looked at everything that had been sent. Remember, when we asked people to submit, we told them they can submit an excerpt of around 200 words with a translation, but also a motivation letter as to why they would want to participate in the development of a multilingual anthology in Kenyan languages. So for us, the translations into either Kiswahili or English were very helpful in determining what kind of writing they are doing, right? And in cases where we could read, for example, I read the Kikamba submission, Kimani read a lot of the Kiswahili and Gikuyu submissions, Jane read the Ekegusi submissions, Mokoma read the Gikuyu submissions as well, but we also had different languages from different places. So we depended on the translation in those cases, and also the motivation letter. It was very important for us to see that these people actually were invested in the process of producing work in their languages, and the motivation letter really helped us. But the selection was also intentionally geared towards having a spread of languages. So while we had many fantastic stories that were submitted in the Gikuyu language, we could only pick one or two. So that was also a determining factor, that we wanted to have a spread of different languages. After the selection process, the workshop technically began by having pre-sessions. And the first pre-session, of course, was for people to gather and talk and get to know each other, and also to introduce themselves and communicate what they expected of the whole process. And really to talk about what kind of stories they wanted to write, because not everyone had written the entire story. They had the idea of the story. And we wanted to spread the engagement before the workshop, which was to happen like two months later, and ensure that they are not only motivated across the process, but they kept working on their translations, right? And then we had a second pre-session where we felt that it was very necessary that they learn the craft of storytelling and the different things that make a short story. And in this case, we invited Professor Mukoma Wagogi, who teaches at Cornell University, and asked him to please do a masterclass on the craft of storytelling. After that masterclass, we also had Professor Gugi Wathiongo speak to the participants and encourage them in this journey that they are about to undertake. And it was very important for Professor Gugi to be there and to speak to the participants. And I'll tell you, the reason being that not only is he the most outspoken advocate for African languages, but he's done this for a very long time. And he's faced all the challenges that you can imagine, right? And he's also seen all the successes that you can imagine in terms of doing work in an African language. And of course, it was a very proud moment for him, having seen his short story translated into 100 languages. And now he's seen even more writers coming up and saying, let's gather, let's talk about translation, let's talk about writing in Kenyan languages and make this thing work. The workshop is on its last day today. It started, the physical gathering started yesterday after the pre-sessions were, not only about logistics, but also learning the craft. But when the workshop began, there has been a very interactive process of people sharing their stories and the way in which they're approaching the translations, but also hearing from our two facilitators, that is Jen Obuchi, who has done incredible work in the Ekegusi language. She has translated books such as Romeo and Juliet, which is a classic Shakespeare, into Ekegusi. She has also translated one of the most famous novels in African literary tradition, which is Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, into Ekegusi. And as she said, it has become very successful. So we also had Kimani Wajogu, who has done incredible work for so many years in promoting the Kiswahili language, but also other Kenyan and African languages, right? And for the participants to be in the presence of these two extremely accomplished writers was very important for them to not only be inspired, but to learn the ropes in terms of what do they do when they want to translate, and what are the most pressing questions that they need answered. And really the answers didn't just come from Kimani and Jane, but they also came from the participants themselves through the interaction. And in that way, I feel that the workshop has been extremely successful in achieving what it set out to do. But then we're now looking at what happens after the workshop, right? Because the hope is for us to be able to publish a book, right? And publishing a book means it takes a very careful process of going towards not only the process of mentorship, but also the process of editorial work and the actual printing of the books themselves. So it's going to be quite a long process of engaging these participants from here on. And the first step, of course, is now for them to go back home with the tools that they've gathered through this workshop, the ideas about translation and how to approach their work that they've been able to attain through the workshop, to now go back home and work on their stories. But we will be pairing them with mentors. Right? We will seek out people who are very accomplished in the various languages in which they're working, so that we can pair them and they would help them to develop the stories, especially the original stories in Kenyan languages, so that they are in the best shape possible. And then also through the translation process, where they will now get to translate this originally written stories to Kiswahili and then to English. And there will be a very collaborative process between the participants as well. And the hope is that in the next 4-6 months, the whole process of writing, translating will be done. And then we can start now on the editorial aspect before the publishing happens. It was very important to have Henry Chakava come and speak to the participants, and especially about the process of publishing. One, publishing in African languages has been a very difficult process for many years and for many reasons. And the main reasons, of course, being how do we approach the business sense of publishing in African languages? Right? Because at the end of the day, a publisher is not only looking at the cultural value of these books, but also on the business side of it. And Henry, having run East African educational publishers for many years, and having published some of the most important books in Kenyan languages, such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Shetani Murabaini and other books, right, in various Kenyan languages, it was very important for him to come and speak to them, not just about the importance of this, but also the challenges that they are going to expect. Because we do not want to romanticize the process, right? We want them to have a clear picture of what it's going to be. I'm really grateful for all the people who have participated in this workshop. It's the first of its kind, and for everybody to have really given the best they could to make it happen is something I'm very grateful for. And just to mention a few people, first, of course, is our facilitators, Professor Kimani Ojogu and Jen Obuchi. And I would also like to thank Professor Mukoma Ogugi, who came all the way from Cornell University in the US to be with us for the entire duration of the workshop. But also, I would really like to thank Professor Madhu Krishnan, who has collaborated with us through her project to be able to produce this translation project, but also the process that follows after the workshop. And she's been working very closely with Dr. Doslin Kiguru, who is a resident here in Kenya and helping or being a part of the research team that is working in Professor Madhu's research project. And then also everybody really, all the writers for the stories they submitted and the hard work that they put in ensuring that not only do they write original stories or translate other people's stories, but also they are trying to engage this story in 3 different languages, their original language, and then a translation to Kiswahili and a translation into English.